This is Theology Bits, a ministry of Central Lutheran Church, Eugene, Oregon. I'm Pastor Ben. This week in our video, we're in our third installment of the World of the New Testament. And in it, we're going to focus on something specific that comes up very frequently in the New Testament, but we may not speak of fully or satisfactorily, which is dining. And what I mean by that is it's not just what one eats, not just the food, but when people are eating together. And this comes up all over the place in the New Testament. One of the things we know about Jesus more than anything else was his open commensality. He would eat with anybody. And what I want to suggest is if we understand the background, it's even more striking. So first, this is one of those topics where there was both Jewish background and Roman background. So we're going to do them on either sides of the page. So the Jewish background around dining. First, we should note that most people are familiar with restrictions in Judaism of what one can eat, with whom one can eat, and how one eats. These are the restrictions in structure. So the most obvious, of course, is in what one can eat. Later on, this would be called kosher. That word is not yet there in the New Testament, but that idea of there's only certain things that can be eaten, other things are forbidden. With whom one can eat is something that's very clearly present in the New Testament, but it's a little more confusing to find where that is. This, what one can eat, that's from the Old Testament, very clearly. Certain foods are allowed and certain foods are not. With whom is a trickier thing. And then how one can eat, often requiring ritual washings before eating. This question of with whom one can eat gets tricky because there's not a huge amount of that, at least deliberately, in the Hebrew Bible. And if any of you know modern Jewish groups, there's not a huge amount of that either. Many of you viewing this who might not be Jewish very well might have been invited to have a meal with a Jewish family. There's nothing wrong with that. So what is this New Testament talking about, where it makes these strong restrictions about with whom one can eat? Well, there's a few different possible explanations. The most common and maybe most practical is simply a practical one, meaning if people in the Jewish nation are eating with Gentiles, then what they're going to eat is probably not going to be followed properly. And so the problem of eating with others is that you'll inevitably not be following the laws specifically about that are specifically there. The other might also be practical, and it might be about communal solidarity. In our own lives, do we make necessary restrictions on with whom we eat, and what we eat, and how we eat? I would suggest most all of you do. And so it's not about these bad people who are so restrictive, because that's simply inaccurate. We all do this because for almost every culture, eating is a very intimate space. Many of you will in your own culture, recognize that the dinner table is something we do together as a family. We're going to make that a priority. It's when we have family time. Well, if that's true, you're putting a restriction on this, aren't you? And then how one can eat might be the thing that really gives us the clue, though. There might be more going on here than just those practical things. You see, what is this ritual washing about? It was not about sanitation. They didn't understand that. It was that was a handy byproduct that indeed they did suffer from less bacterial diseases because they did wash their hands, but they didn't understand that. That wasn't the point. The point was something else. When is it they did ritual washings? They washed their hands before they eat, but they did a lot of washings. And again, you're not going to find very many places in the Hebrew Bible telling you to wash your hands before you eat. Why are they doing it? Well, there was a time when you would do washings which were about purity rules. The purity rules in the Bible, in the Old Testament, are things that you need a ritual to become ritually pure. It's important to understand the difference between purity and morality. Morality, by the way, if someone was being immoral in the Old Testament at any point, the solution was not go do a ritual. The solution was ethical, change your behavior. Purity was something else. Purity, you do a ritual washing before you came into the sanctuary to worship. And so the focus is all about worship. And this is what the priests would do before they went into the temple. They would go ritually wash, and then they'd become pure. And they did not say that it's because they've been morally right or wrong. It's simply by being outside of the sanctuary, you have now become profane. And in order then to be sacred and to prepare yourself for worship, you go through a ritual, most usually washing. And so, the purity rules were all about washing leading to worship. Well, what's happened? The dining table has become a sanctuary. This is not a gathering of people to unload after a hard day. This is worship. And so the dinner table is a place of worship. We must ritually wash, and now we might understand the restrictions a little better, because they did very much care about hospitality. They very much cared about caring for the neighbor. But they saw those as ethical injunctions from God, and that did not mean we are going to worship together. They worshiped with those who were ritually pure. And so if this is a worship space, then it changes radically. When Jesus, by the way, has open commensality, he doesn't challenge this. He doesn't say, no, this isn't worship, you've missed it. No, he says it is worship. But I am going to find a new means for purity, to give someone a new way of being ready to worship that can include those others who would not have been included. So this is a very different thing. And so this is a bit of the Jewish background. Now let's look at the Roman background, because this is the part that probably some of you don't know much of at all about. A few practical things about the necessity of the dining table. One, we have something called a day off. The Romans did not. Second, we do something quite commonly, public gatherings. They did not, especially in the provinces. That is, Romans were very anxious about any kind of public gathering that people were having, because who knows what you're going to do with those gatherings. You very well might start conspiring to overthrow the government. And so what is left is private gatherings. And you don't have a day off to come together for some other thing. You can't go out in public. What can you do? You can dine together. This becomes the primary social mechanism to have relationships at all. And social life was one of the most important things in Roman society. I think we touched on in our overview the patronage system. In the Roman world, there are no social services. There is no police force. There is no fire department. How did you keep your things from simply being stolen from out from under you? Or if someone was in a medical crisis, how did you get help? Well, it was about your social life. It was about who your, we'll call them friends were. They're actually called guest friends were. You needed to know someone, and hopefully someone in power, that you were friends with. And friendship is more than what we tend to think of it. It was contractual. And everything was around maintaining those friendships. Well, how do you maintain the friendships if you can't gather together? Well, you did it by dining together. The dinner table was one of the most important things that you had, and you needed this. This was a necessity. This guest-friend relationship was more than just, well, we're kind of friends and we agree on topics. It was, if I come to your door, if we are guest friends, if I come to your door, no matter what I've done, you will provide me shelter. You will let me in, you will protect me, you will not ask questions. This is why those in lower positions needed someone who was powerful, because you needed someone who could provide you care and comfort. And of course, you could also use it really as a deterrent to say, you could come and harass me, but if you do, I am friends with someone else who will take care of you. And so this was an important thing. And then at the dinner, the posture is totally different than the way we eat. This, by the way, is true here too, is that they would recline around a table. A table was not at sitting height like our tables. It was much, much lower, and you're basically lying down together. And what does it do? It changes the posture, and it elongates the time. The whole world of dining is something that's to be spent together in time. And it was almost impossible to meet and do anything without a meal. The religious life, which is our last video, was about the way the meal was the way the people participated together in public life. And what's more, in these meals, you would spend time and you would have what we would call a reading event. You talked about things, not just trivial things. This was a deeply intimate moment where you'd get together and you would talk about something that mattered to your life or to the state. It is also where one person very well might read something and the others would listen, hear it, and even though they very well couldn't read, they are participating textually. And it might even be the one who was providing that reading event, that person themselves might not be able to read, but they're reciting something that was read or that was written. And so it really challenges our structure of literacy. Because after all, unless you were very wealthy, you did not have the Greek word scholia, leisure, meaning school. And so the only time you had to spend time with one another, to learn something, to see what matters in the world, to develop relationships, was the dinner table. Dining together was one of the most important critical moments of our lives. And so I hope this provides you some background to what is Jesus up to and what is Paul up to. Paul talking about the Jews and Gentiles have to eat together. Or Jesus saying we're going to eat with those you don't want to eat with the marginalized and the poor and the tax collector. What does that do for the message behind all of that? We will continue with our series, World of the New Testament, next week. I'm Pastor Ben.